Now this is not a new release. This came out in June of 22nd. Yeah, June 2020. Holy shit. June 2020, 2220.
Let me see here. So I just got the Rail Shooter Air Twister in the mail from Strictly Limited Games, and I'll say I knew nothing about it, nor have I ever even heard of it, except that I saw Yu Suzuki's name attached. And I watch enough GameSack to know that his track record is impressive. He's worked on or created games for Sega such as Space Harrier, Hang On, Outrun, Afterburner, Virtua Fighter, and Shenmue, to name a few. I saw his name attached to this and decided that was good enough for me, and I only paid $30 for this bad boy on the PS5. Since I've got it, I might as well review it, and it's not every day I review modern games like this, so let's do this.
Okay, bitches, so this is not a new release. Now, this came out digitally on Mac and iOS on the only platforms that matter. June 2022. Now, it did come out to the other platforms that don't mean shit, like the PlayStations, Xbox, Windows, the Nintendo Switch. That came out November 2023 for, I guess, all the losers that play video games on actual consoles that matter. You feel me on that shit? Listen, let's talk about what this is. Let's take a look at the actual box here. So,
Air Twister. Into the Air, the Last Hope. At the exit of a white hole, extra-dimensional spaces called air froth out in bubbles. The protective queen bubble was burst asunder with the flash emergence of the needles. Arch, a descendant of the royal family, knows that she must raise the banner of resistance alone by wielding the air-mastering Air Twister powers. Well, okay, that doesn't really tell me much of anything, actually. This description almost feels like it was randomly written by AI. But let's go into the story here real quick. You're a chick that floats around and kills shit, and you'll ride on flying creatures for the boss fights. It looks like Space Harrier and feels like it wants to be Panzer Dragoon, but it is different from both of those games, although I could understand if people considered this a spiritual successor to Space Harrier, more so than that of Panzer Dragoon. See, that wasn't that hard. Now, I don't usually talk about music first, if I even talk about it at all. But with Air Twister, the very first thing I had to contend with was getting smashed in the nuts immediately by the insane soundtrack on the title screen. It sounds like Freddie Mercury from Queen, and the rest of the music throughout the stages and cutscenes is also so eccentric and bizarre, it's difficult for me not to love it. Here's a sample of the title screen music real quick. Now, some of the other tracks feel ripped right out of Final Fantasy or some operatic rock or metal like Epica or Nightwish. Both bands I really like, but I'll never play them around people. A lot of people in America just aren't getting that shit. Once I started to feel this soundtrack, it made the game so much more enjoyable for me, and I just started going with the flow of things, like taking a hit of acid. Over time, I just entered the fantasy zone, bro, and I just went with it. Now, when beginning the game, you are greeted with a cutscene that I assume is showing you some sort of story that presents soldiers riding giant geese, and that's when the low-budget vibes begin to surface, especially since there are no sound effects during this opening sequence, only music, and it feels jarring at first. While the cutscenes don't look terrible, it's not going to knock your socks off, and a lot of the creatures and characters look like plastic dolls. This doesn't detract from the game, but Stellar Blade, this is not. Though I will say, the more I played Air Twister, the more I found this to be endearing, as in, you can tell the people making this really tried to go for something artsy and eccentric here, and for the most part, I think their vision shines through the otherwise lower budget aesthetics. So enough about all this trash, let's go over how the game plays, how it actually feels to play it, the stages, and whatever else I could think of.
This game is so incredibly simple. The game forces you into a tutorial the first time to give you an idea of what you need to do and where the fire button is. I mean, you don't need this tutorial. It's so cut and dry. But when you first start, you're only going to be using one button, that's to fire. Now, like Panzer Dragoon or Rez, or I suppose Crimson Dragon, which I haven't played, so I'm not 100% sure, but the mechanics here are similar but slightly different. It is simplified in this game, and the way it wants you to play it varies slightly from those games. For some reason, this game constantly reminds me of a 3D Space Invaders, although I'm not sure if that even makes sense. In each stage here, you'll essentially be running into enemy patterns, and what you're trying to do here is, through a mix of reflexes and memorization, you want to trace the patterns of the enemies here with your character. And as you do this, you will lock onto these enemies automatically, and ideally, when you've reached your max lock-on, you press fire, and you will fire homing attacks at these enemies, killing them. Most take only one hit to die, and the key here for a high score is taking as few hits as possible from enemy fire, but also clearing entire groups of enemies. I'll still say, it reminds me of Space Invaders, and even watching my footage now, it still reminds me of Space Invaders. Let me know if I'm way off base in the comments or what. Maybe I'm insane. But while playing Air Twister, you may notice that you have 3 big hearts in the upper left corner with a myriad of smaller hearts underneath. This is your health, and if you've ever played a video game before and aren't a complete dipshit, this should be obvious enough to you. But how this works here is any damage you sustain is taken out of the smaller hearts below the larger hearts. When this reaches 0, you will lose a large pink heart, and the smaller hearts will reset. You basically just lost a life, though the game doesn't pause or reset your progress in any way when you do, which is appreciated. The only time that happens is when you run out of health completely. You will need to continue, then restart the stage. You are restricted to only 2 continue, so my recommendation is that you do not take any damage or lose any lives while playing this game. That way, you can beat it, right? So, as of this writing, I have not completed this game. However, I have reached the 10th stage boss out of 12 stages and have played for some hours now. From what I've seen, the level designs are excellent, so let's give you a brief rundown of what you can expect to see. There's a desert stage, an Alice in Wonderland inspired stage, a water stage. Yeah, it's your usual stuff, and nothing here is going to really surprise you. But didn't I just say the level designs are excellent? Yeah, I did. And I'll also say that when it comes to games like this, you have a pretty good idea of what the game is going to serve up stage-wise, but that doesn't mean that what's here isn't executed well, because it is. These stages are visually interesting, and there's not a single one I don't appreciate. Most stages are straightforward, and usually the only thing that can injure you are the enemies or their gunfire, but on a very few stages there are actual obstacles in the stage itself that can damage you if you don't dodge them or remove them. These are usually easy enough to avoid, like either shooting boulders or dodging barriers while traversing tubes. It's all very easy to miss, but the introduction of obstacles to break up the monotony of the gameplay is welcome regardless. The enemies that litter these stages are fairly forgettable. They mostly exist so that you can murder them, and by the time the first stage is done, you've killed more things than Dexter Morgan. Now, you've got flying robots and flying animals, and there's not a huge variety to either, but again, these just exist so you have something to do. You won't be paying much attention to them anyway, aside from observing their patterns, so you can get a read on how to trace their formation in order to lock onto them and send them straight to hell where they belong. In most cases, one shot will do these assholes in. However, in some instances, some enemies take multiple hits, and in that case, sometimes locking on is not the best option. Rapid firing is. You'll get a feel for this the more you play, and some of the bosses are the same way. Speaking of bosses, let's talk about them real quick and get it out of the way. Now, have you ever played a Darius game? And I feel like a lot of bosses in Air Twister are inspired by Darius, but not all of them. We got your standard Darius fare here, like a giant crab, squid, and even a manta ray that probably killed Steve Irwin, so beat the shit out of this one because it's personal. And rest in peace, bro. Collision Course was a highly underrated movie, and I miss you still to this very day.
Everywhere Terry and I travel in the outback, we're called on to help problem wildlife. Have a go at this whopper. Their venom is highly toxic. You're right, and things drop off. You wouldn't want to take a bite around here. Woo!
These boss fights go down probably the way you would imagine. They've got weak points, and you need to attack those weak points in most instances. Locking on to certain targets repeatedly and firing repeatedly is what will win the day, but
In some rare cases when there's only one target to hit, such as an eye, you want to go the rapid fire route. There are also instances where the enemy may take swipes at you and the screen will flash with arrows indicating exactly where you do not want to be in about 1 second before the boss destroys your life. These are fun to play, albeit fairly easy for the most part, though the later bosses can become troublesome. And after you complete each boss, you will receive a score and a final grade if you're into that sort of thing. I'm not much of a score chaser, but in games like this, I know some people are, so just be aware that it's here if that's something you care about. Alright, let's talk about the upgrade system and some of the other available options outside of the main game. What made me realize I really liked this game was after my first time playing through it. I realized there was an upgrade section that reminds me highly of Hardcore Uprising, a Contra game that doesn't have the Contra name in it because Konami's ridiculous, but it's still a Contra game and one I reviewed a few months back. That being said, Uprising has an upgrade system that, after each playthrough, you will have earned currency, and that currency can be spent in a store to purchase permanent upgrades that will then follow you into your next playthrough. This system right here gives any game instant replayability, and when I realized this game has this sort of system in place, I instantly liked it way more. Hardcore Uprising is a kick-ass game that is so much fun, and yet highly underrated, and I played it for something like 40 hours, I think, and I was upgrading the characters like crazy to become the baddest asshole on the planet. I can see the same thing happening with this game, although unlike Uprising, the upgrades here are on more of a linear path. The game wants you to upgrade things in a particular order, with a little bit of wiggle room here and there to deviate slightly off the main path if you choose. Even so, it's excellent. After just a few upgrades, my subsequent playthroughs, I was able to progress many levels further into the game than I was just my very first playthrough. Now, upgrades generally consist of more health, which is a huge advantage, but also adds additional weapons and armor that activate automatically, or being able to lock on to more enemies at once, or even gaining a new ability and adding the second button to be used during gameplay. A slowdown feature that will slow the enemies and give you a chance to take them all out easier. You can upgrade this further to allow it to be used more often. There are also a ton of cosmetics to unlock, which is great that it's here instead of behind some DLC bullshit, but unlike in Stellar Blade, I don't really care about the cosmetics here. I just picked something I thought looked cool, and I'll probably leave it at that. I've got a lot of good things to say about this game, and the reason for this mostly is because the gameplay loop is so simple but satisfying. However, there is one major problem that crops up repeatedly, and I'm not sure it's something that I can really overcome without having memorized each of the stages, and that is the enemy bullets. Maybe I'm dumb, and there's a great chance that's the case, but regardless, it has consistently been very difficult for me to dodge enemy fire, and not to toot my own horn, but I play a shitload of bullet hell games, and I'd like to think I'm pretty good at them, so dodging bullets in this should not pose much of a problem, yet it does. The way it comes at the screen and the oval shape that most bullets are, and the size they are, in this 3D space, it can be very confusing for me to gauge exactly where the bullets are, and where I need to be exactly to not get hit by them. I find myself getting hit by bullets I thought I was clear of repeatedly, especially during boss battles. That little nitpick aside though, overall I can't find much to complain about when it comes to Air Twister. It is essentially the epitome of a pick up and play title that you can constantly return to at any time and have a good time with for 30 to 40 minutes and then put back down. I always appreciate games that don't require an enormous investment of time or a huge learning curve. Sometimes I just want to play some crap while I've got a few minutes to kill, and this will fit that bill nicely. Give this one a shot, especially on your iPhone. I can't imagine a better place to ever play a game like this on some shitty mobile device, but in all seriousness though, if you've got a real big boy console that uses a controller, give this one a go and you might be pleasantly surprised. And yup, that's my review. Oh yeah, and there's other modes in here too, but I didn't dive into them and I probably never will, aside from arcade mode, which is just the base game without any of the upgrades you've obtained from the main game like the extra health. The other modes sound dumb, and there's also a ticket system where you earn tickets for logging in every day, which sounds very mobile game-ish, which is to say it sounds like shit. So I probably won't be engaging in any of that either. Anyway, thanks for watching this. Buy this game if it looks fun to you. $30 for a PS5 game like this is a steal. I don't know what it costs on iOS or Mac, but if that's where you play your games too, whatever. Anyway, thanks for watching this, guys. I'll see you on the next video.
Maybe someone's playing a prank on you.
Who would do that?